Yeah, yeah. What's going on in the world, man? I don't know, but I see stuff. I see patterns, and these patterns that I see are interesting to me. So you look at the modern media, and you see these trends in media, in the movies, in the TV shows. All right, a few trends you see. One of the movies that came out a little while back, not too long ago, was Ex Machina. And Ex Machina was a really cool movie because uh, the cinematography is excellent. But the movie really consists of mostly two types of scenes, and there's a third type of scene, but it's almost entirely two types of scenes. Either you're outdoors in the wild, like just chaotic outdoor nature, or you're in this windowless office, straight halls, lab-like environment, and you just bounce between the two. And it is filmed in, I believe the name of the house is Waterfall in Pennsylvania, which is one of, I think it's Frank Lloyd Wright's creations. And what they say about I've never been, but what they say about the house is when you're there, you can't tell if you're inside or you're outside. So it's like a transition piece. And if you pay attention to that movie Ex Machina, you can see how they're using those three scenes basically. But most of the movie is either outside or inside. And then it occurred to me the other day because I was for the third time watched Jonathan Peugeot's take on the Matrix, the symbolic take on the Matrix, where he's looking at the thread. He's not looking at the symbolism of the Matrix. That's impossible. There's too many symbols. But he's looking at the common thread. And I had to watch that 3 times before I was like, all right, now I can rewatch the Matrix and get more out of it. Which, had you told me that before I saw Jonathan Peugeot's thing, I would have said you're crazy and that's impossible. I've seen that movie, dozens of times. I know it really well. But when I watched Jonathan Peugeot and then rewatched The Matrix, I found more stuff. And one of the things I found was that dichotomy, right? So you've got the dingy world, right? This dingy, messy, dirty, raw, sort of real world, right? Where Zion is and where the actual people are, right? And everybody in the nice, ordered, comfortable world, the pretty world, is fake. So that's interesting. So you can see that thread going up. I mean, The Matrix is an old movie, right? By this point, you can see that thread starting there and sort of going. And now you see those two worlds everywhere. But what is the story in The Matrix? Because the story in The Matrix, in that context, I find fascinating. The story in The Matrix in that particular context is a story of preferring to be gritty and uncomfortable and not have tasty food and be constantly hunted and chased, right? In order to be a true free individual. That's the story. I'd rather live in this gritty, grimy environment, hunted by, nightmares of technology, effectively, being stalked by a system, an oppressive system, computer system that's trying to order the world, than live in a comfortable, happy, safe world where I feel oppressed. So in the gritty world, you are oppressed. In the real world, you just feel oppressed, but you're actually kind of free to do whatever you want to do. And when you look at it that way, it's like, well, that's kind of weird. Like, you would rather be sort of starving and miserable and always on the run than to be a quote individual, which of course nobody in that is an individual. The hovercraft doesn't run itself. Everyone's got different skills and contributions to make the larger thing work. And then you see that in a show like Severance, which is on Apple TV, which I at once enjoyed and was horrified by. You see that in this new thing, The Peripheral, right, where there's two worlds, and look, there's a gritty world and a not so gritty world, right? This dichotomy is very sharp, and in older movies, it's not as sharp, right? So if you look at like a Western, you ride into town. Town is nicer than the farm, kind of, there's really three sort of realms in a Western, right? There's the idyllic farm that's, mostly safe, but can come under attack, and it's hard to defend because, these ranches are huge, right? And then there's the road. The danger is always on the road in a Western, right? And then there's town. And town is kind of gritty and not, super comfortable necessarily, but it's ordered, and, occasionally like disorder breaks out and that needs to be mitigated, but there's an authority there to do that, right? And at some point on my better channel on navigating patterns, I'll do a thing on leadership and authority. I keep saying I'm going to do that. It's very hard. So I do these stupid things scriptless. So I don't even know how I'm able to do that, but it works for me. So yeah, you can see these threads, these themes about what's acceptable, like acceptable losses, which interestingly is a theme in The Matrix, right? If you watch all three Matrix movies, which I recommend because actually 2 and 3 are not as bad as you think, they're a little longer than they need to be for sure, but they're just as philosophically relevant, just in a different way. The machines, ultimately admit, there are levels of survival that we're willing to put up with. And I think that's actually a much more interesting and important message. What is the level of disorder or the level of griminess that you're willing to put up with? Do you know how bad it can get? Like, have you studied enough history? Weimar Germany, even more recent history in maybe Brazil, which is, had its collapses recently. Are you aware of how bad it can get? The collapse of the golden ages of Rome and Greece, for example, like the Middle Ages, which, look, some parts fell at different rates at different speeds, and technologies were lost and rediscovered, and what were people willing to put up with, right? Or what did people have to put up with because, which is more important. So if you destroy the technology we have today, what is that going to look like? Are we going to have indoor plumbing? Because I'm not so sure. Like, I'm not saying we couldn't reproduce it, but what would that take? Because we're not set up to reproduce indoor plumbing, say, from the early days. Like, we don't have ceramic pipes anymore, right? We could remake them, but that would take some time. And time is one of the components that's often missing in these modern stories. It's one of the threads that I see that is missing in the modern ethos. You need that time component to understand things don't happen instantly in the world. And something like the fall of the Fourth Estate, which I did a video on navigating patterns, like that takes time. When the incident that breaks the structure happens, the structure doesn't immediately fail. Right? And the same in the other direction. When you inject something to fix a structure, it's not automatically going to align immediately. And trying to make it do that in either direction is bad. It's bad, right? So there's a time component to chaos. There's a time component to order. And our modern media doesn't recognize that. It's often middle out thinking. Another video on navigating patterns. It's often in the middle of the story. They're not telling you how you got there necessarily, or they're not showing you all the struggles to get there, right? And they're not showing you all the bad things about collapse. And so, you don't really notice that the 2008 housing crisis took 5 years to unfold, or maybe 6 in some cases, or maybe 7, right? So people were still losing houses 7 years after 2008 housing collapse. And they were losing it because of the housing collapse, because these things take a very long time to play out, especially larger things, right? Larger things have more momentum. And we're not accounting for that. But you can see the loss of that information and this bubbling up from underneath, right? Of what are we willing to put up with? What are the trade-offs? Where is this going? What would it take to be free? And are we willing to do that? Because order is oppressive, but it also has a lot of advantages. And that, I think, is sort of the missing picture. those are the themes. Is that struggle? Those are the themes of modern media right now. Even if it's poorly told, although things like Ex Machina are excellent, Severance was excellent. You know, The Peripheral, interesting so far. It's not done yet. We'll see how it unfolds. And there's a lot of stuff like this that you can engage with. Stay away from the Hollywood stuff and go for the independent stuff. So yeah, I mean, pay attention to that, because I think that's important. And I just wanted to share that observation. And you know, maybe I wanted to do it about a week ago, but you know, I get around to these things when I get around to them. But I hope that's helpful.